So welcome everyone to the panel with Canisius College and Ibero Puebla and our interdisciplinary approach to migration studies through theory and practice. I'm Dr. Richard Reitzma, and I'm founder of the Borders and Migration Initiative at Canisius College. And with me are several of my colleagues, and I'm proud to say former students as well. We have with us Anita Butera. Dr. Butera is professor of criminal justice at Canisius College, and she will introduce herself more when she presents. We also have with us Dr. Cecile Ettore. Dr. Ettore is also my colleague at Canisius College in the department or program of sociology. We have with us also a former student of mine, Caitlin Buhlman, who was also a former colleague of all of us in campus ministry. And we have Guadalupe Quiroz from Mexico, actually Puebla, Mexico, who's joining us from in association with Ibero Puebla, which is where she was a student of mine as well. And again, I'll let each of you present yourselves a little more in detail in advance of your session. So we're going to do this as a roundtable. We'll each speak, introducing what we do and how we do things, and then we'll open it up to questions and a broader conversation. So I'm going to share my screen quick a minute, and then we'll get going. So everyone ready? Yes, here we go. So yeah, super long title because I can't figure out how to do titles, but anyway, there we are. So I'm gonna start with a little bit of background. I worked in my youth with migrants in Michigan. I even attempted picking blueberries alongside migrant workers in Michigan. That did not last very long because I did not have the capacity to do it. I was, I think, 15, 14. And I later worked providing GED certification, driver's licenses, and English language lessons to migrant workers on farms in Michigan, or at least the farms that gave permission for that. So my formation in migration rights labor has a long professional history as well as a personal history, as I'm currently married to an immigrant and was in a previous relationship also with an immigrant. My approach to immigration studies is twofold. On the one hand, I research, teach, and employ service learning and organize events around the push-pull factors of immigration, particularly the realities that many are fleeing in an attempt to enter the United States. On the other hand, I'm also interested in guiding my students to understand that their own perceptions of their country, and Buffalo specifically, are not the idols they imagine. Further, I want my students to understand that the immigration process is lengthy, costly, demoralizing, and fraught, and that it is not the mythic, easy path to entry that family folklore may have many of them believe. However, I also aim to have my students reflect on these matters so that they can take actions that may help us create a better world that assuages the experiences of so many and helps us craft a better, more just, and equitable world. My current work is inspired by the fact that Buffalo is a border city. Buffalo is also a refugee resettlement city and a city experiencing an uneven renaissance of sorts due to its refugee and immigrant population. I was also inspired to action because most people in Buffalo are unaware of the following facts. First, that Buffalo has a heavy ICE presence, lying as it does within the 100 miles of ICE authority. Two, that there is a federal detention center and immigration deportation court here. And three, that despite being a northern border, it is also fraught with complexity, desperation, fear, and all too rarely, hope. I find the Jesuit values to align with my own humanist values, providing a structure for organizing my classes and motivating my research. My approach blends service learning, accompaniment, pedagogy, and research following the universal apostolic preferences of the Jesuits. These are finding God in all things, which I interpret as finding hope and goodness through walking with the excluded, journeying with the youth, and caring for our common home. These principles have at their core a vision of a better world, and I have used them to model my pedagogy around immigration, to focus on the excluded, which includes migrants, the LGBTQIA+ community, women, children, and LABIPOC, environmentalism, environmental degradation being one of the push factors impelling migration, and concluding with a reflection project to help build hope. These principles also have guided my research and my teaching, and have been useful and employed in both my classes taught in Spanish as well as those taught in English. One of my projects involves interviews with migrants who have been deported from the US and find themselves restarting their lives in Mexico. The stories of these deportees are widely diverse, but the majority of them found their lives in the US to be particularly difficult. For some, they have managed to create new, affirming lives for themselves and others back in Mexico, creating communities with other deportees, while others continue to struggle through economic hardship and family separations, helping students and eventually the American public understand and empathize with these realities, and the cost of deportation in both communities will, I hope, inspire us to change. While exposing students to these narratives through the testimonies I just mentioned, as well as through films, readings, graphic novels, and so forth, I've crafted my pedagogy to incorporate carefully planned experiences to assist students in their nuanced evolution of understanding the immigration situation, the challenges, and the opportunities. My goal isn't simply to expose the challenging environments of countries of origin, nor the nightmares of detention, deportation, and the immigration process itself, but to find ways to see hope and to ameliorate the problems so that we can work toward a better future. This process of concientización, or consciousness raising, involves the following pieces: service and community-based learning. I partner with Justice for Migrant Families, which is based here in Buffalo. This organization of community volunteers came into existence about 5 years ago after an ICE raid on various Latinx serviced restaurants in the city resulted in the arrest of 25 workers, throwing communities and families into chaos and galvanizing some segments of the city. Prior to COVID, students would go through a training and visit with and accompany migrants detained in the Batavia Federal Detention System, and would also support migrants in hearings at the courthouse. Those students initially found the idea of entering a detention facility daunting. It is, after all, a prison. They found the experience deeply moving. In some fortunate instances, persons they encountered in detention have been released and have visited our classes to share their experiences and their gratitude for the humanizing encounters of a single hour's visitation. Since COVID has shut down visitation, we have switched to other means of support, including a pen pal program, assisting Justice for Migrant Families in coordinating their food bank and manning the phone line for detainees in Batavia to reach out for assistance, conversation, commissary, and so forth. These activities allow students to experience the horrible conditions of detention and the precarity of migrant life, while also allowing them to form meaningful relationships of support and participate in community building. Secondly, we also collaborate with other actors on the ground who work alongside immigrants and other marginalized peoples in the US, Mexico, and the rest of Latin America. These people work for NGOs and other social networks to confront systems of injustice, speaking with people directly involved in the processes, thus helps inspire students to see how we can create a better world. These partners include the Kino Border Initiative, a binational Jesuit organization based in Dos Nogales, Arizona, Sonora. This organization focuses on providing accompaniment, food, respite, basic medical care, basic mental health care, resources, and temporary housing for migrants attempting to cross into the US, as well as those who have been deported back across the border. We're hopeful in the coming semester to establish a new partnership with KBI that will service as a hybrid study abroad and internship exchange program. Also in Suchitoto, El Salvador, I work with Sister Peggy O'Neill with Centro de Arte para la Paz, which serves the community offering rehabilitation from the traumas of the Civil War and ongoing challenges, which of course is one of the motivating factors of migration throughout Latin America. In addition, from Ibero Puebla, I work with Guadalupe Quiros, who will be speaking later, who formerly lived along the tracks of La Bestia and who researches and teaches courses on immigration literature. I also work with Tamara Blanca, a fellow former student, along with Guadalupe, who is also a feminist organizer in Puebla. I work with Onan there's Puebla. I also work with Anan Vasquez, an LGBTQIA+ and indigenous rights activist with Vida Plena in Puebla, Mexico. I also work with Carla Rey from Oaxaca and Mexico City, who is a Muxe cultural activist, and with Jose Ignacio Escorriola Giovannini, an environmental activist in Costa Rica, whose work helps me explain the care for our common home, which is environmentalism, the degradation of which is increasingly a factor pushing migration. Thirdly, we speak with lawyers who are graduates of our program who work as advocates for immigrants so that students can appreciate the legal intricacies of a constantly changing, dehumanizing, costly, and frustrating immigration system. Students also interview persons, primarily women and LGBTQIA+ immigrants who have immigrated through the legal system successfully, who now live in the United States or who immigrated from the US to live in Latin America. This latter part adds yet another nuanced dimension for students who often only think of immigration as occurring into the United States, not out from, and further complicates the realities of migration. One of these signature experiential learning pieces developed with KBI and colleagues at Canisius, including Caitlin and Guadalupe and Sechil, has been the immigration simulation, which we have honed over the years and are also able to deliver virtually, as well as in both Spanish and English. This exercise helps students experience, however briefly and artificially, the complicated, challenging choices immigrants face. All the roles in this role-playing game are based on real-life people, and upon conclusion of the activity, students hear the outcomes of the real people whose lives they briefly assumed. After students have reflected on their relationship to power in the process, many are awed and humbled at how difficult the reality is, given their levels of frustration and anger in an RPG that lasts less than an hour. This experience, along with guided reflection, helps students appreciate the challenges of those populations they are engaging with and develops greater sense of empathy and support. Finally, the largest undertaking combining pedagogy, service, and research is the establishment and continuation of the Canisius College Borders and Migrations Initiative, which I founded in fall 2018 with the help of the people on this panel. After being exhorted by colleagues at KBI to take action after witnessing the issues at the border. The initiative organizes approximately 4 events per semester that are free and open to the public on a wide range of topics related to the global issue of borders and migrations. So far this semester, we have hosted a town hall on the Afghan refugee crisis and the legal obstacles they face. And Buffalo itself is about to receive about 400 of those refugees. A speaker from the UNHRC talking about archiving refugee histories, and a panel on providing healthcare to marginal communities in Buffalo. These events are now hybrid, thanks to COVID, with both in-person and streaming options, and they're all housed on our webpage, Canisius Borders. Students help work with me on the Borders and Migrations Initiative and are funded through a special scholarship program. I will say, however, that finding funding and support for these activities remains a constant challenge and is labor intensive. One of our challenges is finding institutional investment and an institutional commitment to understanding this intersectional work on diversity, equity, and inclusion as of the same value as scholarship and on par in terms of merit, tenure, promotion, and so forth. All of these activities then, which I've outlined above, and to summarize, include experiential learning, role-playing, citizenship tests, mock asylum interviews, packing their own mochila or their own backpack, after watching KBI videos on materials found in the desert, interviews with both the victims of the migration system and those working to ameliorate the injustices of the system, interviewing immigrants from and to the US, viewing feature films, documentaries, and shorts, listening to and analyzing songs about migration, conversations with lawyers and actors in the field, and a geocaching project exploring Latinx and Hispanic sites in Buffalo, all combined lead students to reflect upon and confront mythologies of US exceptionalism so that they can educate their peers and their families about the realities many people face, and to chart a course of action to address these injustices in the creation of a more just and equitable world for all. Happily, the work I and my colleagues do has resulted in several honors theses. And I would just point out that Guadalupe's thesis and Ibero Puebla had to deal with this. And I know that both Dr. Butera, Dr. Ettore, and myself have each individually directed or co-directed theses on immigration issues. We do this with an eye toward working in the area with students who evolve with an eye toward working on areas of migrant justice and support. These experiences has often also resulted in students changing their majors or changing their focus so that they can find careers postgraduate that will engage them in these issues. So here's our YouTube channel if you're interested about the projects that students do. We also have this, which is the Borders and Immigration and Migrations Initiative webpage that has also a teaching toolkit that is ever evolving and is free and available to all. You just need to Google it and find it. We also have our YouTube playlist that includes Borders and Migrations videos from all events from the last 4 years. And I want to conclude with sort of an evidence of the impact that this kind of combination of pedagogy, research, and service has had. This is a student who experienced this phone bank experience literally last week, and she wrote to me, "My phone bank experience taught me a lot of harsh realities in only 2 hours. One caller had been in prison in the United States for 22 years and had been awaiting deportation from Batavia for 2 years after that. The next caller asked me about my Dunkin' Donuts order. His birthday is on Christmas, and he always got double the presents growing up. His favorite birthday present was a remote control car. All of them missed their families. They wanted to hear about the snow in Buffalo. I signed them up for commissary money and pen pals, an idea that each of them profusely thanked me for. The third caller had to leave after 15 minutes. All right, Emily," he had misheard Emma, and I didn't have the heart to correct him. "Thanks so much for your help. I've got to run." His wording seemed somewhat inappropriate. Run to where? I waited for all of them to hang up first. It felt like the only piece of freedom I could offer. I told Richard the experience made me sad and frustrated, and she sent me an angry emoji afterwards. "Welcome to my life," he responded. "Now write about it." "I'm too sad to write about it. I need to cry it out of my system first," I said. It was true. The experience deeply saddened me. I felt the pain of these broken men who missed glazed donuts in New York City and hugging their moms. It's made me hug mine a little tighter, that's for sure. But it also enraged me. Caller 2 has served his time. He just wants to go home to Trinidad. There is an entire world waiting for him. He's never had a cell phone. He's never been married. He doesn't know if his brother even knows where he is. I wanted to personally march down to whomever is in charge and demand I be allowed to personally aid in his journey home. I don't even know whom I'd talk to. I don't know who's in charge. And I hate that they get to make money off of destroying the spirits of these already broken men. If I needed a reminder of my own good luck, privilege, or whatever it means to have compassion and love for others, this was it. I was also reminded that I am not powerless against a complicated, malignant system. To those callers, for those 2 hours, I was their connection to the world. Thank you for listening. I will pass the baton on to my friend, former student, colleague, Caitlin Buhlman.
Thank you, Richard. Can everybody see the screen okay? Yes, great. So as Richard mentioned, my name is Caitlin Buhlman, and I spent the last 3 years working in the office of campus ministry at Canisius College, coordinating the immersion program and social justice education and advocacy initiatives. As I begin my presentation, I do want to note that I've recently left my role at Canisius, so I'm no longer at the college, but I'll be speaking today about the work that we've done over the past 3 years when I was in that role in campus ministry. So before I dive into the specific work that campus ministry has done, I want to start by explaining a little bit about why campus ministry has engaged in this work and why specifically we've become so involved in migration initiatives, work, service, and research at the college. So a lot of this begins, as Richard mentioned, through our partnership with the Keno Border Initiative. So if you're not familiar with them, the Keno Border Initiative is a binational organization that's located on the US-Mexico border in both Arizona and Nogales, Sonora, and they work with migrants in a variety of ways. They provide humanitarian aid by running a comedor, providing first aid, running a shelter, and they also do a lot of work around education and advocacy. And so that's how Campus Ministry and Canisius is connected to KBI, because they run an immersion experience for students to visit and learn about migration firsthand in that context. And something that KBI and Canisius shares in common when we think about immersion experiences is that immersion experiences are not supposed to end when you get off that airplane back in your hometown. The goal of these experiences is that our students live out what they have learned and follow up on that experience within their own context, within their own community. So there were a few of us colleagues that have participated in immersion experiences to KBI. On this call, Richard and myself have visited, and we've had some other colleagues at Canisius as well. And I think we're deeply personally and professionally impacted by that experience, by getting to meet migrants, hear their stories, and learn about the experience in the borderlands. But something that's unique about KBI is that they don't just hope that the participants, when they return, do follow-up work, they actually require it. So for Campus Ministry and for Canisius to return to KBI every year, we actually have to submit a report about what is the work that our students have done related to migration upon returning to Canisius. And so that gave us an imperative and a push, not just on a personal level, but on a professional level, to start thinking more intentionally about how Campus Ministry, how Canisius was engaging with migration within our own context, our own campus, our own community. So we started to ask ourselves some questions about how did this apply within our own context? How could we be exploring migration here in Buffalo? How did it apply at a Jesuit school in Buffalo, New York, in a border city? Because as Richard mentioned, Buffalo is actually located on the US-Canadian border. So our campus is only about 10 minutes from the border. So how does this apply in our local community? And as we began to question and ask some of these questions, we realized there were folks within our own community that were already doing work around migration. And so we began to try to create initiatives at Canisius that gave our students the opportunity and the desire to follow up on that experience, engage in migration-related issues with the experts already within our own community. So there was effort being done around research, around courses, around service with community partners here in Buffalo that was already exploring this. And we came to approach this on campus through this collaborative interdisciplinary approach where we had folks in academic departments, campus ministry, the library, across campus, trying to engage in these migration-related initiatives. So the imperative came from this follow-up from KBI and this desire to collaborate with folks on campus. And so what I'm hoping to share with you all is a little bit about how Campus Ministry specifically has engaged in migration-related programming. And specifically, I'm going to focus on 3 areas of service, immersions, and advocacy. So as Richard and I previously mentioned, one of the organizations we partner with for the immersion program is the Keno Border Initiative, which is located in Nogales on the Arizona-Mexico border. For one of our domestic winter break immersion experiences, we've also partnered with an organization called Rural and Migrant Ministries that's located in Lyons, New York, a small town in upstate New York. And our students spend the week getting to know and working alongside migrant farm workers. So they learn about migration a little more deeply within our own local context in New York State. And we also collaborate with a number of community partners right here in Buffalo that engage with migrants, refugees, new Americans for different service opportunities, internships, community initiatives, so that we're connecting both locally, domestically, and internationally through the immersion and service opportunities that Campus Ministry provides. We've also had opportunities to engage students in faith and reflection. This is part of what campus ministry brings to this work that is unique. We bring this lens of Jesuit values. We bring integrating our faith, our spirituality, spaces for reflection to this work, so that it's not just learning academically about migration, but it's also an experience of educating your heart, your spirit, so that it is part of Cura Personalis and educating the whole person when it comes to any topic, but specifically migration. So some of those opportunities have included during one of our first Borders and Migration Initiative weeks, campus ministry held a migrant mass. So essentially we took a Sunday mass and we integrated in music in different languages and prayer petitions that were for migrants, and tried to take our experience of liturgy and worship and make it relevant to that context. We've participated and hosted different vigils, such as this photo here is from the Defend DACA vigil that the Ignatian Solidarity Network invited Jesuit schools to participate in. We've also participated in different advocacy initiatives related to migration. The main program would be through the Ignatian Family Teach-In for Justice. If you're not familiar with the Teach-In is an annual social justice conference that takes place in DC every year for students of Jesuit high schools and colleges to explore different social justice issues. But the key part of this experience is that it culminates in an advocacy day on Capitol Hill. So we train our students and we bring them to Capitol Hill to meet with their elected officials and talk about what they've learned about. So we've had students in these advocacy meetings share their own personal or family experience with migration, or share their personal experience from going on one of those immersions and meeting a migrant, and how these experiences motivate them to advocate for changes to topics like immigration. So for the past several years for the Teach-In, immigration has been one of the key areas of advocacy. And so you can see in the photo, we have students on Capitol Hill that were about to meet with our elected officials from a few years back. But taking what they've learned and experienced in the classroom, in immersions, through service, and using the legislative process to advocate for the changes they hope to see. On a more local level on campus, we've also had students engage in letter writing campaigns around topics like DACA and New York State's green light law, which was to provide driver's licenses for folks that were undocumented. A final initiative that I want to share that was unique, I think, to Canisius is that when we began thinking about this question about how do we respond to migration within our local context, in the summer of 2019, campus ministry, along with other offices on campus, helped provide housing for asylum seekers in a residence hall. So this came about because one of our community partners in Buffalo, Vive, received an unexpected influx of asylum seekers that essentially overwhelmed their capacities. And so there was this emergency need for housing. And Vive reached out to Canisius, and Canisius decided that we had the ability to provide housing for a group of asylum seekers in one of our residence halls because it was during the summer months and the building was vacant. I will mention that around just a few months before this decision was made, the president of the college had participated in an immersion to the Kino Border Initiative, where he had walked with our students to meet and work with migrants, and also had that same message of how are you going to follow up on that experience. So I certainly cannot speak to the motivations of our president for deciding to approve allowing asylum seekers to stay in campus, but I want to note that that decision came about 2 months after he participated in an immersion to the border alongside our students. So when this decision was made, campus ministry was one of the offices that helped collaborate and support welcoming these folks to our campus. And it gave us the opportunity to not only respond to a need in our community, but also we were able to treat it as an educational and relationship building opportunity for the Canisius community. So we were able to provide information around the difference between immigrants and refugees and asylum seekers. And we were able to invite members of the Canisius community to cook dinner each night during their stay, but not only cook and deliver that meal, we also invited them to stay and to eat with those who were joining us on campus, to get to know folks, to build relationships, to build this connection between all members of the Canisius community. And this, some of the ways in which campus ministry supported this was through logistical support of shopping for groceries, providing transportation, organizing the meal coordination. We had students involved that had been on immersions in the past that got to know the folks that were staying on campus. We were on call to help respond to any questions or concerns that may have arisen. And so this was a 6-week program we were able to accomplish in the summer of 2019. And I would say that collaboration has definitely opened the door to the possibility of future collaborations with community partners or with other organizations in Buffalo that work with refugees, asylum seekers, new Americans. So all of these initiatives that I've shared, they're done in collaboration with the colleagues that are on this call. A lot of our programs feed into one another. So a student might participate in an immersion and come back with more questions than answers. So we might encourage them to sign up for the courses of one of our colleagues here on the call. Or when I'm recruiting students to participate in an immersion, I might visit these folks' classrooms and share with students, hey, if you want to learn more, why don't you come and participate in this program? Because I think what we've realized is that our work is stronger and more effective when we're working collaboratively, and we're able to bring our areas of expertise and our own lenses to this work in a way that helps really provide educational opportunities, service opportunities, immersive opportunities for the full Canisius community around migration, both in academic ways, in service-related ways, in educational ways that really, we hope, helps educate the mind and the heart and the spirit of our students and our community members, so that as KBI talks about, folks can then, because of their involvement, figure out their own personal next step of how do they apply their education or experiences into the context of their own lives, either on campus or beyond. So at this point, I am going to pass it off to my colleague, Guadalupe. And yeah.
Thank you, Caitlin, for sharing this with us. And just a note, Guadalupe Quiros will be speaking in Spanish. I will be doing translation, but as I am not qualified for simultaneous translation, I will do translation after the fact, as Guadalupe provides me with occasional moments of breather.
¿Qué tal? Buenas tardes, mi nombre es María Guadalupe Quiros y soy maestra en literatura aplicada por la Universidad Iberoamericana Puebla. Imparto un curso llamado Literatura e Migración. Mi acercamiento a la migración viene desde muy pequeña. Crecí con migrantes europeos y bueno, después de esto viví mucho tiempo en Córdoba, Veracruz, y en donde yo vivía pasaba el tren que todos conocemos como La Bestia. Entonces siempre estas historias me intrigaron y después de la tesis, la tesis de la maestría, que también versó sobre migración, realicé investigación más profunda y entendí muchas de las cosas que no me quedaban tan claras acerca de este tema, pero que solo con esta investigación pude acercarme a ellas.
So welcome, my name is Maria Guadalupe Quiros. I have a master's in applied literature from the University of Ibero Puebla. And I have been, since very young age, involved with issues of immigration, particularly around European immigrants. I formerly lived in the city of Córdoba along the tracks of the Bestia train. At Ibero Puebla, I did my thesis also on migration, and since then have continued to investigate and do research to more deeply understand the problem of migration, and I teach courses as part of the program on immigration and literature.
Me gustaría empezar con esta cita. ¿Por qué la literatura? Esta cita de Irene Vallejo de su libro titulado El infinito en un junco. Somos los únicos animales que fabulan, que ahuyentan la oscuridad con cuentos, que gracias a los relatos aprenden a convivir con el caos, que avivan los rescoldos de las hogueras con el aire de sus palabras, que recorren largas distancias para llevar sus historias a los extraños. Y cuando compartimos los mismos relatos, dejamos de ser extraños.
Thankfully, I don't need to translate that because the translation is here.
But you can read it. So, compartir los mismos relatos, la literatura como un medio para dejar de ser extraños, aprender a convivir con el caos, con las historias, aprender a convivir con los otros. En este caso, tomar a la literatura como un medio que nos muestra las historias de los que parten y al que el mundo se les parte cuando migran. Además, ¿por qué no considerar a la literatura como una forma de migración? Migrar a otras formas de pensamiento, expandir las fronteras de nuestro saber y conocimiento, cuestionarnos, hacernos muchas preguntas para quizá no encontrar todas las respuestas, pero sí tener estos medios que nos ayuden a entender. Indagar desde la literatura sobre nuestro origen y nuestra realidad cambiante.
So I'm not going to translate all of that because some of that is here on the slides, but the use of literature as a means of translating immigration experience, the fact that literature itself is a translation and transmigration and transformation, and the use of the medium of literature as a way to experience more profoundly the processes of migration.
Sabemos que en la actualidad, en gran parte de los países del mundo existen cada día mayores presiones migratorias. COVID-19 cambió en buena parte el mundo como lo conocíamos y aún no terminamos de conocer las consecuencias, pero estoy segura que el incremento en la migración será una de ellas. El efecto negativo en la integración de los migrantes parece crecer día con día. El congelamiento en los procesos migratorios que al menos existe en México y el uso político que se hace de la migración hace que la presión crezca aún más.
Again, much of this is summarized in English in the PowerPoints here, but to note the increasing pressures on migration and the effects that are yet to be noted of COVID-19 and the changes and impacts that will have on migration, as well as migration as a political and social problem in Mexico as well, that it is not limited to the United States, and that it continues to be a tool of political manipulation.
¿Qué es lo que pretendo con la literatura? Cambiar las narrativas. Las narrativas definen lo que creemos o queremos ver. No hay una historia única. Además, las narrativas pueden inspirar, educar o animar, o pueden usarse para descorazonar o engañar, o vencer también. ¿Por qué no utilizar este medio para cambiar también el mundo?
Again, summarized in the PowerPoint, but why literature? Part of it is to change the narrative itself, right, around migration. And since literature and narratives define what we believe or what we see or what we want to see, and to complicate the narrative around migration, that there is not one single story, but a variety of stories, and to use literature and narrative as a means towards inspiring, teaching, and encouraging, rather than to cheat or win against the narrative. In other words, to use narrative strategies as a positive rather than as a negative in relationship to migration histories.
¿Cómo? Pues mediante lecturas, mediante el uso del poder de la palabra. Ensayos, ficción, testimonio, libros como Los niños perdidos de Valeria Luiselli o Poder migrante de Violeta Serrano, o Yo tuve un sueño de Juan Pablo Villalobos, que son testimonios de pequeños. Diferentes historias que nos acerquen a esas experiencias. Hombres, mujeres y niños narrando lo que les sucede en el viaje, cómo es su experiencia al llegar a una nueva realidad y cómo es renunciar a lo conocido en la espera de un mundo mejor. ¿Vale la pena? ¿Cuándo lo intentan? ¿Cómo lo intentan? ¿Cuáles son sus herramientas para transitar este camino?
As we see here in the slide, using a variety of narratives, including testimonial narrative, essays, fiction, and mentioning in particular Los Niños Perdidos de Valeria Luiselli, which is translated into English, and I'm blanking on the title of that in English. Tell Me How the Story Ends, I think is that in English. To explore how narrative is used to navigate new realities and to explore the profound impacts of navigating these realities. Many of these are focused, and correct me if I'm wrong, Lupita, but much of your research has also focused on children's narratives.
Yeah, and women.
And women's narratives on the experience of migration.
Yeah. Según el portal de datos mundiales sobre la migración, somos 7.700 millones de personas en el mundo. De estos, 281 millones de personas son migrantes. De estos migrantes son 140 millones de mujeres y 33 millones de menores migrantes o más, porque los niños son los más difíciles de ser contados. Entonces, sorry.
Perdona.
Creo que merece la pena conocer las historias.
So given the numbers as we see here, it's important to get to know at least some of these stories, which we get through literature. I just want to point out that among all of these statistics that we have here, Guadalupe mentioned that the number of children is probably more because they're the most difficult population group to assess numerically.
Si alguna lección tenemos que aprender de todo esto es que la migración es una constante en el mundo global. El cambio es la constante. Nuestros sistemas de referencia se está cambiando, como sucede con las personas cuando migran. Y de ahí la fuerza, y de ahí muchas de las cosas que tenemos que aprender de ellos. Y finalmente los otros somos nosotros.
Again, the slide has this in English, although I want to emphasize that in point 3, that our system of reference is always changing, as do migrants and their experiences. And for Lupita, the point of departure in discussing literature of these experiences is that we can learn from them because it is an ever-changing experience. And so those narratives are important for educational purposes of the constantly changing realities of migrants.
Y eso es todo. Muchas gracias. Estos son mis datos por si alguien quiere tener contacto conmigo. Gracias.
Thank you, Lupita. And here is her contact information if you would like to follow up with her on her continuing work on both teaching and researching the issue of migration from the perspective of Mexico. Pues muchas gracias, Lupita.
Gracias a ti.
Traducido más o menos bien.
Sí, muy bien. Gracias, Richard.
So with that note, I'd like to pass it to my next colleague, Sechil Etterer, Dr. Etterer from the Department of Sociology at Canisius College.
Hi, everybody. Can everybody see my screen and hear me well? Okay. Hi. Thank you. Thanks, Richard, for the introduction. As Richard mentioned, I am Associate Professor of Sociology at Canisius College. And today I will talk to you about my work, especially in the lines of community engaged scholarship. I'm going to talk about community engaged scholarship and my experiences with it in the fields of research and pedagogy. Community engaged scholarship is basically a combination of community engagement and accepted standards of scholarship. What do we mean by that? Community engagement entails application of academic knowledge and institutional resources to solve problems that the communities are facing. And we try to do it through collaboration with the communities instead of just doing it as academics. And also, like I was saying, as scholars, there are some accepted standards from us. Our work should be, at the academic standards. It should meet some academic standards. It can be at the level that it can be disseminated in scholarly venues, and it can be subjected to critique by peers and to be published in academic journals. So, of course, this brings some issues because mostly the faculty who wants to engage with the community, they do not have enough incentives or supports for that. And unfortunately, in recruitment and promotion, community work and the impact of the community work is not as valued as more scholar work. And why is that a challenge? Because, like I said, with community engagement, you are trying to collaborate with the community partners, agencies in the field, organizations, bring your forces and bring your knowledge together and try to address a problem. And for that, the products you produce is different because usually you want to speak to or communicate with practitioners, policymakers, community leaders, and the public. So you need to create websites, briefs, manuals. You need to give talks to the public or create documentaries. But as an academic, if you focus on this side, you're expected to produce scholarly journals. But these scholarly journals are focused on specific academic scholars, and it uses the academic jargon. Usually it's not read or followed by the community, by policymakers or practitioners. So if you want to do community engaged work, but also you want to be a good scholar, you should be able to combine both. And you should be producing all kinds of products, which means yes, it's very time consuming. But a lot of us, like people joining here, we are trying to do that because of the big impact on the community. And I will just give you some examples of how I try to incorporate community engaged work in my scholarship. First of all, with research. This is an example from an international level research. So this was a collaborative work. A field work was conducted in Turkey with Syrian refugees. But like I mentioned, a big part of community engaged scholarship is collaborating with the organizations and agencies that work on the ground, because they have a lot of resources and they know our subjects better than we do. They have the knowledge base. So for this work, I worked with the agency, the Bridging People Association, and they were already working with the Syrian refugees in the ground, trying to help them with resettlement, following the civil war in Syria, trying to help them find jobs, trying to find them housing, and, basically raising awareness in the community to make sure that everybody contributes. And we together we tried to raise awareness about the Syrian refugee crisis. We tried to raise awareness around exploitation of refugees in the labor market. And we wanted to inform public policy. We created reports, we wrote reports, pamphlets, created some short video clips. We also tried to educate the public, the Turkish public, first of all, about Syrians, why they are coming, why and what kind of help they need, what rights they have or they do not have. Also, at the time, in North America, countries like United States and Canada started resettling refugees from Syria. So I also tried to give presentations to prepare the public and also the officers who work in citizenship of and immigration of Canada. I tried to inform them about what is happening on the ground, what are the issues Syrians are facing, what are their needs, and I gave talks to the public about their culture. And we tried to mobilize community, we tried to mobilize people to sponsor more refugees. Another example at the national level, I work in collaboration with two social agencies at the moment. One is Jericho Road Community Health Center, the other is Partnership for Public Good. And together, we are examining the anti-Asian hate and discrimination amid pandemic. As we all know that since the beginning of this COVID-19 pandemic, there have been lots of cases and incidents against Asians, aiming Asians. And we said that, okay, is that also happening in our community, in Buffalo or in New York State? How can we find that? How can we report that? How can we educate our communities around those issues? So we have together prepared some online surveys. We are also conducting interviews. We are doing this with Asian community and also with white community. Our aim is to create reports, pamphlets, organize some public meetings, maybe workshops to raise awareness on this issue and to support Asian communities. Like I said, this is still an ongoing work. We are at the stages of analyzing data and creating our reports to share with the public to raise awareness on the issue. And how about teaching? Community engaged pedagogy, I always try to incorporate community engagement in my courses. Of course, it also depends on the classes and courses I teach, but whenever I can, I think about the community aspect. How can I get my teachers involved and engaged with the community so they can learn more about their community and they can help some of the issues? For that, again, I partner with the social agencies and organizations in our city. And depending on the topics, the list of agencies, I ask my students to spend time changes. For instance, in some courses, I talk about modern slavery and human trafficking. I ask these students to go work with PAT, People Against Trafficking Humans. Like when we talk about education and problems in the education institution, I ask my students to go work at teacher's desk or Our Lady of Hope homeschool after school programs, helping the students coming from underprivileged schools during these after school programs. Or if I'm talking about migration issues, I work with Justice for Migrant Families, as Dr. Reitzma does, or International Institute of Buffalo, or VIVE. So what I'm trying to say, I try to make the link, the bridge between the theory discussed in class and in practice, in real life, what is happening, how these issues affect people in real life. So I want my students to go and experience, go spend time with these people. I ask my students to spend like 15 to 20 hours in a semester working one of these agencies. And it's not just service, it's about while working, making the link between the theories we discuss in class and lives of these people. And they have to write me a paper which is more academic, but using the real life experiences of these people and discussing why do we need a place like Teacher's Desk, which is an organization that's provides supplies for teachers. Why do the schools do not have those? Why the teachers go all the way to Teacher's Desk to get their supplies? I make them see what's happening and discuss why do we have a gap. Why do these organizations try to fill the gap but not people in power? So I make my students critically think about these issues. And in some courses, in more upper level courses, I ask my students to do some social action projects, which means that taking an action on a topic that is a contemporary issue that is related to any of the topics we cover in class. Like it can be about migration, it can be about gender identity, sexual harassment, anything they pick from the topics we cover throughout the semester, and they choose on what topic they want to take action, they want to raise awareness, they want to do something about it. And some examples: they can organize letter writing campaigns, and petitions, creating YouTube videos to inform the public on issues, organizing workshops, film screenings with Q&A sessions, tabling at the library and just talking to people. Hey, have you heard about this? Do you want to know more about, for instance, Afghan refugees coming to Buffalo? I gave the example of Afghan refugees because this is a current issue my students are working on. Like Caitlin mentioned, at Canisius, we have had the experience of housing some refugees in the past, and currently we are also getting ready, preparing to host more refugees on campus, and these are from Afghanistan. And a group of students in my honors class, they have decided to work on that, and they are creating pamphlets, videos to educate the public about, who are these Afghans, why are they coming, and they are also trying to raise some funds to buy them winter coats when they arrive. And for that, I will show you a little video clip they have created. It's a short one, about 1 minute long. Yes, yeah, as you can see, this is just an example of what my students create, because in class we were discussing about the refugee identity, and some of the students were concerned that with Afghan refugees coming, but people are going to think that they are terrorists, how this community is gonna react to that. So we are like, maybe we need to educate the public. What can we do? This video came as a result of it. Some examples, for my students, I have done in the past in different classes, like petitioning for access to driving licenses for the undocumented people. This is the green light, the law petition that Caitlin also mentioned. My students actively worked on getting people's signatures for that. And in another class, my students did write a letter, and they petitioned for legal residency status for DACA people. Again, they sent these petitions to some legislators for this aim. And another example, one group focused on the issues of gender and sexual identity, and they have organized some tabling sessions at the library to talk to people. They collaborated together with some of the clubs on campus. They organized a documentary viewing and Q&A followed by that. These are some examples of the kinds of works my students got engaged with the community and tried to mobilize knowledge and raise awareness around some of the issues they care about. So what are the pros and cons of community engaged scholarship? It definitely mobilizes multiple forms of knowledge, mobilizes different groups of people. And when we use it as a pedagogy, we educate people, students, for democratic citizenship. And it leverages the capacities of all the participants to improve the community's well-being. But on the other side, as a scholar, I can say that it's less valued scholarship. It's very, labor intensive, time intensive, but it's not as valued as producing scholarly products. The community impact is not as valued, unfortunately, in our field. The scholar publications, in scholarly journals, this academic impact is more valuable, and it's just considered as service, right? It's not counted as your scholarship. I will be happy to answer any of the questions at the end of the session, and this is my contact. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Cecile, for sharing with us your experience on this front. And finally, we have Dr. Butera, my colleague in criminal justice.
Hello, everybody. My name is Anita Butera, and I joined Canisius College in 2018. My presentation is going to be a little bit different from the presentation of everyone else, because I want to focus on an aspect of the relationship between theory and praxis, theory and community service, that is very seldom discussed in the classroom, which is basically, we look at our pedagogy and our teaching experience as being a transformative experience for students. But unfortunately, for education to really be a transformative experience, it must change also the faculty, it must change also the professor, because we cannot change others without changing ourselves. So my presentation is going to be a little bit different, which is the reason why I will introduce myself as I proceed with this presentation. First and most important, I am an immigrant. I came to the United States approximately 20 years ago to finish my graduate student. And the immigration process really changed me, and in many ways made me who I am today. And I cannot, as I said before, fully explain how my life experience has impacted both my research and both my pedagogy. Because in terms of my research, I discovered race when I came to the United States, as many other immigrants did. I still remember the first time that I crossed the border. I came into the United States and they asked me to fill out the race category. I had no idea what they were talking about, to be honest with you. And that really changed, push the first phase of my research, which was to basically focus on the relationship between immigration and race relationship, especially race conflict, as related to labor exploitation. I conduct originally my field work in Washington, D.C., in Italy, and in Mexico, to basically analyze how immigration is related to the economic growth of US society. That eventually prompted me to go into law school and become a lawyer, and in that capacity, I represented for years migrant farm workers. So the first question becomes, how do I integrate my experience, my personal experience within the classroom? How do I bring my own experience as a lawyer representing migrant farm workers into the classroom? It's a very simple question. It's by basically creating awareness, not only from a theoretical approach, specifically by teaching the students that immigration, it's not a decision that people make easily. You don't leave your country unless you have a valid reason. whether that reason is economic or political or personal in some case, and by basically saying how the immigrant experience not only define the immigrant itself, but also define our mainstream society and our mainstream culture. So we have this idea of immigration as people basically coming here because everybody wants the good life that Americans enjoy. The reality is completely different. Life in America is not easy. Life in America is difficult for Americans. It's even more difficult if you are an immigrant. I usually integrate this into the classroom, not only by sharing my own personal experience, but also by bringing sometimes speakers, some of my former colleagues or some of my former clients. Once I brought one of my former clients that basically discuss the actual process of crossing the border illegally. They basically talk what the so-called rest houses are and how dangerous those rest houses are, because that's where most of the first contact with human trafficker usually takes place. And then we also talk and discuss the reality of farm work. We discuss how difficult it is, for example, to clean corn without having proper gloves because of the way the corn bleed, and how if the corn has pesticide, those pesticides actually bleed into your own skin. In general, I use that to then bring that experience of exploitation with experience that students can actually relate to, experiences that are close to their life, but not necessarily part of their life. For example, something that I found interesting is how many students may know or may not know where Afghanistan is, and the fact that Afghani refugees are coming into the United States, but they have no idea about the social reality of downtown Buffalo. They have no idea about the fact that until relatively speaking, few decades ago, Italians were not considered white, nor were people from Norway or Portugal or Turkey and so forth. And so basically trying to break that barrier of them versus us, and we are so nice that we allow them to come in. And that usually helps a student to understand that we are in many ways into the same boat, that others are really us, and we are others, because we all share a common experience of exploitation, a common experience of violence, a common experience of oppression, and democracy is nothing else but a myth that we have constructed in order to basically justify our way of living, even when our way of living is against our own interest. I encourage students to get involved with the Border Initiative, to watch the movie, to go to the conference. And I try also to increase our student awareness of the reality of other students in the classroom who may not share the same experience, whether it is socioeconomic or religious or ethnic. The final aspect of my pedagogy is basically to try to incorporate my criticism toward the globalization, because globalization really is westernization, and we are seeing that in the most recent Afghani refugee crisis. And every time we deal with the immigrants or refugees and so forth. And for that, I try to bring in my experience of working and living in Saudi Arabia and interacting with a complete different immigrant experience. Because being an immigrant, being an upper class immigrant and working, let's say, for Aramco or as a consultant for the Saudi government is a completely and totally different experience as compared to working as a maid or as a driver in Saudi Arabia, and even worse, being in Saudi Arabia as an undocumented immigrant. And so I try to basically present this reality to the student and try to create a parallel between a reality that we may see as completely different from ours, completely inferior as compared to ours, and how that reality is the outcome of same need to exploit other for our own lifestyle, even though under different cultural and academic different experience. I use my experience in Saudi Arabia not only in order to create bridges and basically help a student to find the similarity, but also to understand the reality such as terrorism, such as human rights, defined not from a Western approach, but from a different approach, because when we look at human rights, what we are really talking about are political rights. So they are the first 10 amendment of the US Constitution, and we have the tendency to ignore the fact that, having a house, having a living wage, having access to health care, having access to good education are also human rights under different cultural context. And also I try to explain the whole idea, I try to discuss the whole idea of terrorism as what we look at terrorism is not to consider such from different approach. And how our way of living may be considered as terrorism when basically interfere with the lifestyle of others. In other words, I try to create a context that is based on theory, on application, on criticism of theory and both application, which eventually bring us to question knowledge and to respect humanity. A final comment, which is actually, I would like to go back to my first slide. Something that I have always find intriguing is how the Ignatian paradigm, in reality, is an antecedent of what we will call critical thinking, because what the Ignatian paradigm basically does is to try to put our personal experience within the historic context that we live in, and basically try to bridge the so-called micro-macro link, or how socially constructed identity and the historic period that we live in basically change our personal experience and our social reality. In conclusion, I want to start basically the same way I actually began. I start my journey, my academic journey, my professional journey as an immigrant. My experience as an immigrant has changed me and made me who I am today. And what I bring to the classroom is my experience as an immigrant. And I also try to basically instill in students the importance of doing community outreach, involving themselves in the reality and life of others. And even though that reality and life of others is that of one of their classmates. Any questions?
Thank you, Anita, for your presentation. I think what we can do now is open up the panel to discussion amongst ourselves and any viewers who have caught all or some of our conversation. So I mean, I'm happy to open the floor if anyone has questions. Otherwise, I'm also willing to start the conversation. Okay, Lupita, yes.
Yo quiero preguntar, La población en Búfalo, inmigrante, la población inmigrante en Búfalo es de mayoría latina o de dónde procede de dónde es, cuál es la procedencia de estos inmigrantes y si se quedan o solamente es una estación para cruzar a Canadá.
So Lupita's question is actually interesting and complicated. It's about the immigrant, the makeup of the immigrant population in Buffalo. What are the percentages of the different dominant groups, and whether they make a home here and stay, or whether it's a transitional. I mean, I'm happy to have others answer this. I'll just say that the history of Buffalo is waves of different groups of immigrants. Earlier groups of immigrants would have been Germans, Poles, and Italians. Many of those neighborhoods that were traditionally those neighborhoods are now inhabited by other migratory groups, as those immigrants, the original immigrants stayed in Buffalo but moved into the suburbs. A more recent large group of immigrant population, although this word is migrant population is perhaps better rather than immigrant, are Puerto Ricans. It's the largest Latin group in Buffalo. They are, of course, citizens of the United States. But by far, Puerto Ricans outnumber other Latinx or Hispanic groups in Buffalo. There was a recent surge of additional Puerto Ricans migrating to Buffalo after Hurricane Maria, because many of them had families here. More recent migrant groups are from other areas and predominantly refugees. And I'm going to let Suchil perhaps speak to that, as her experiences more directly with that population.
The biggest recent refugee group is from Burma. And we also have some population from Syria, and there's a big group of people from Vietnamese also.
Anita, yes, you're on mute, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Lupita, in general in Buffalo, because I worked with the migrant farm worker in upstate New York, in general, immigrants from Central and Latin America do not settle in Buffalo as a city for two reasons. It's a border town, which basically means there is no constitutional protection at all. The migra can stop you for whatever reason because there is no constitutional protection. And moreover, the kind of immigrant I worked with were migrant farm workers. So they usually lived in the area between Buffalo, Rochester, or Buffalo and Syracuse and so forth, because that's where the big farms are. And also the way migrant worker work, they basically follow the migrant season. So they start in Florida with strawberry, then they move for peach in Georgia, and then finally they reach New York. Obviously, the ones who are on the West Coast and start in California, they follow a completely different pattern. But the problem with downtown Buffalo is that, as Richard correctly said, during the 50s, when the old immigrants, Italian and Polish and so forth, moved to the suburbs, the downtown of Buffalo started to rapidly deteriorate. And right now, refugees, what is giving life to the downtown Buffalo.
I pulled up the map, Lupita, so you could have a visual of where Anita was referencing and how much the area is actually under ICE influence rather than other areas. Y Lupita, ¿tú lo necesitas en español o pudiste entender?
No, entendí, gracias. Sí, muchas gracias.
Perdóname, Lupita.
No, entendí perfecto, gracias.
Perdóname.
I would also say that's why I use the qualifying term a complicated renaissance, because Buffalo's resurgence is driven by these new populations, but it is an unequal financial benefit to the city of Buffalo and its inhabitants. I'll just leave it at that, I guess, for now. We have an election today that will partly determine some of that. So. Other questions? Do we have other questions within our group or from our viewers? I have a question for you, Lupita. Oh, Cecile, go ahead, please.
It doesn't matter. You can go first.
No, go ahead.
My question is actually to you because, when I was talking about community engaged scholarship, I tried to mention some of the challenges I have faced. So I want to hear from you, from your side. What challenges do you face? Because you are so involved with the community, and this is your direction. You give importance to the community aspect more than the academic aspect, right? More than academic impact, your focus is on the community impact. So how do you feel?
That's, I think you and I have similar experiences in terms of how that is valued institutionally. I have tried to argue for years now that this kind of work should not be considered service, because even though supposedly service, teaching, and research are equal, we know that they're not. And that instead it should be considered research, because the reasons we are able to do this work is precisely because of our research. And our research informs it, and it looks like from the outside service, but in fact, it's not something anybody can just step in and do. These are relationships, as you explained much more articulately than I did. These are things that require personal investment and a negotiation between an academic language and expectations and community expectations. And I find this on a daily basis. And I only engage with the Spanish speaking population of Buffalo, right? But getting these two communities, the academic community and the local population, to engage in a conversation is actually more challenging than it should be. And I think there is some movement, academically speaking, to shift that value, because it is a value that is both, that has financial impacts for the college, recruitment impacts for the college, community relations impacts for the college, and, to be frank, diversity, equity, and inclusion impacts for the college, which we are sorely in need of. But that movement is in valuing that work that we do in the same way as, say, a publication is moves at a glacial pace, in part because people who don't engage in it don't understand it as research. And as Caitlin said, it is also part of our mission and our values, and thus, particularly as a Jesuit institution, it should have more weight. I do think parts of the institution understand it, but I don't think it is valued the way it would be if I were to publish an article.
Yeah, because in the talks, everybody is like, wow, what you're doing is great, engaging with community, doing this, doing that. But on paper, they want us to put it under service, right? They don't really, yeah.
And
At the end of the day, it's not seen as your scholarship.
Correct. And while I am grateful that I, and most recently you, Cecile, have tenure, and Anita will hopefully very soon have tenure, it's still a struggle, right? And that work that we do, despite its value, is questioned perhaps in terms of its value equitable to these other things. And I find that deeply problematic, and I keep fighting against it. And I would also just argue that this kind of work takes away from the time it would take for me to publish something.
That is the biggest issue, because it's a lot of work, a lot of dedication. Like you said, there are lots of things you need to negotiate, you need to change the language, you need to produce different products for different audiences, you know.
I would also argue this is something that you can't just go into a community and say, hey, I'm going to do this thing.
Oh no.
Right? Like, it's a question of building. I've been at this for 10 years here at Canisius. It requires, and I think all of us can testify to this, it requires humility. It requires a recognition of an unequal exchange. It requires that we value the trauma of these communities and the limitations they have in being able or willing to engage with us to certain degrees. And I think people need to understand that this is about relationships and relationship building that take a tremendous amount of time. It's not a question of just making a phone call, for example, or collecting, some data. As you yourself know, it's not just creating a survey, it's getting people to answer the survey and making sure it's worded correctly in ways that people will engage with the survey, that then you can interpret. And so I think that we have unfortunately a very challenging road ahead to help our colleagues and administrators understand how complex this work is. Even if they understand its value to some degree, I don't think there's an understanding of its heft, perhaps. Anita, yes.
Yeah, thank you for what you said, Richard, because what you were talking, especially the aspect of humility, is something that it is extremely important. And it is what I was trying to say before. Perhaps I wasn't successful enough. We look at field work as a way of, I don't know, us basically understanding and us basically making them to be like us. And there is really no appreciation of how we create and we define a reality of exploitation for others, and how, no matter how good our intentions are, we are perceived as the enemy just because of the privilege that we have, that we may not be directly guilty of, but we must have an understanding that I am who I am today because people before me made the choice that gave me my position today, and that create a situation of exploitation for others. And that's something that I find really troublesome sometimes, this idea of us civilizing others. And, who is here to say that our civilization should be a model for others to follow? It's not necessarily the case. So
Yeah.
thank you for what you said, Richard.
Well, no, thank you, Anita. And I think too, there's, I feel that our institutional impediments to valuing, how shall I say this? Institutional impediments to valuing the contribution of people outside the academy to the work that we do. I feel that no matter how conscious I am of my engagement, either with Mexico or Central American speakers, or with detainees in Batavia, or with the community here in Buffalo, myself, my students, and thus my institution is likely to be receiving more benefit than we are giving. And so I think cannot think of the word in English. It behooves us to recognize that and try to ameliorate that. For this reason, for example, I apply for grants. I don't get that money. I take that money as a small contribution to the community members who are willing to give up their time. And I think that that is an unusual approach within at least my experience of academia, that we need to find ways to make this an equal exchange of benefit to all parties, not just to the party, us, of privilege as an institution, but how can we also raise up those with whom we are engaging? It doesn't have to be financial, it could be other ways, but I think that that too often academia has the reputation of benefiting from without creating systems of benefit for those with whom we engage in the community, which could take all sorts of forms. I hope that some of what we do with Borders and Migrations and the videos that we make within the community and then share with the community so they can promote their work in the community and the relationships we build with the community, I hope that that ameliorates some of that. But it's always going to be an unequal exchange just because of the systems of power in which we are engaged. But I think we need institutionally, not just individually, and we are part of this, to find ways to make that a less unequal exchange and collaboration. Does that make sense? I mean, I don't have an answer for it, but I'm just saying I'm trying. We are at time, but I mean, we can keep recording for a little bit if that's okay. Because Lupita, I wanted to ask you a question. You teach this from within Mexico.
Yep.
And that's a different perspective. And so I wonder what the reception was to your course on immigration and immigration literature from the students who are used to seeing this as a US problem, or at least my perception is that it's viewed as a US problem. And so I wonder what the perception of the reception was in Mexico.
I will answer
Si
in
necesita que lo
Spanish.
diga en
Sí. Lo voy a decir en español.
Okay.
Mira, no son jóvenes a las personas a las que he impartido el curso, no son estudiantes tampoco. Entonces, pero es muy interesante ver cómo cambia la perspectiva cuando eres mayor también, porque quizá no se habían acercado desde otro punto de vista a estas historias. Entonces, ha cambiado un poco la percepción en donde he impartido el curso sobre todos estos problemas, que no nada más es de Estados Unidos. Ahora lo vemos, es un problema en México también, ¿no? Y es un grave problema. La frontera sur es una cosita a punto de estallar. Cada día son peores los problemas en la frontera sur. Entonces también es como crear esta conciencia y hacer algo con esto que tenemos, ¿no? Ya estamos, por ahí se nos ocurrieron algunas ideas de cómo llevarlo a la práctica también, ¿no? Pero no sé si cambia la perspectiva porque no son jóvenes todavía, no son, ni lo están haciendo tampoco por un servicio, ni como una materia, ni nada, es por gusto. Entonces, quizás sea diferente.
So, Lupita, sorry, I just realized I wrote all my notes in Spanish. Okay, so the course that she taught was not taught to young people, nor to traditional students, but to older non-traditional students. And so they have already a different perspective, and perhaps it's less easy to create different perspectives. But recognizing that Mexico itself is now deeply involved in this issue because the southern border of Mexico is now also ready to explode on a daily basis, right? But that also, you know, using her course and the literature to create a new consciousness, and discussing how they can take this consciousness to bring about a change in perspective or a change in action, right? And that's still an evolving process, si te entendí bien. But also the difference is that her students took this course because they were interested and wanted to, not under any sense of needing it for credits. which of course we know how that impacts student perceptions and experiences. ¿Lo hice bien más o menos?
Sí, sí. Y
Ok.
otra cosa, aquí también, como les pasa con los refugiados afganos que van a recibir, ¿no? Nosotros aquí vemos a muchos migrantes como delincuentes también.
Mhm. And that she also, as in the United States, people in Mexico view immigrants as delinquents. And Lupita has shared with me an article about, because Mexico will also be receiving Afghan refugees and the negative perspective within Mexico about that, which sadly is no different than many of the negative perspectives expressed by our fellow citizens here in the United States. Yeah. Again, I know we're past time, but I want to give Caitlin a chance to speak as well. And I did want to ask Caitlin a question. Because you were a former student, because you were educated at Canisius, because you then also worked with us on many things, how did you get to this point of deciding to invest in this work? Like, was it because of your education, or yeah?
Yes, thank you for that question. And I don't know if I mentioned that in my introduction. So yeah, it might be noteworthy to mention that I'm both an alum of Canisius for my undergrad, and then also spent time working there as an employee and collaborating with you all. I think for me, my interest in this work, personally for me, did stem directly from my educational experience as an undergrad at Canisius as a Jesuit university. I think that for me, the Ignatian pedagogical paradigm profoundly transformed my personal worldview and sense of self and sense of awareness of the world beyond my own personal reality. So that definitely helped impact the areas of study I ended up choosing, because I changed my major from my freshman year until the time I graduated. It influenced the decisions I made afterwards, like doing a year of service. And then I think it also impacted the professional goals that I had for myself and my interest in finding purpose in that work and helping accompanying others in having similar transformative experiences. And it's different for each one of us, and we're all on our own journeys, and that impact and applying things to our own context or the way that we reflect on our experiences is going to be a different outcome for each individual. But I think for me, I can't separate necessarily the work I'm doing today from that formation I had as a student at a Jesuit university, being involved in campus ministry through things like immersion experiences and retreats, which kind of developed my sense of Ignatian spirituality and reflection and understanding that intersection of faith and justice, which for me gave me, I think, a stronger commitment to that work. And then also taking courses with, I think on this call, the only person I took courses with were Dr. Reitzma, but professors who also lived and breathed this work and connected it to the world and connected it to, it was not just coursework, learning theories, but it integrated in real people, real stories, real experiences. So much of what we've spoken about on this call, I can connect to both as a colleague and what I strive to do through my kind of corner of this work, but I think also personally as a student that went through that Jesuit undergraduate educational experience, it definitely had a pretty profound impact on how I ended up doing the work that I do today and how I interact with our students that I'm accompanying through that process. So thank you to Dr. Reitzma and others who were the ones accompanying me on that journey when I was in the shoes of an undergrad, because I would not be in this place or doing this work had it not been for those experiences.
Well, thank you for that shout out, Caitlin. I think that I don't want to speak for Anita or Sechil, but I do believe that we share the joy we get when we connect with students and when they then decide to write a thesis or to go to grad school or to focus on the things that we are also passionate about. I know for myself, that gives me not just joy, but the motivation to continue. So it is a delight for me to share this space with Caitlin and with Lupita. And I just want to say how grateful I am for the opportunities to have both to have taught Caitlin and Lupita and to have worked with and continue to work with all four of you on these efforts. And I want to thank you for your contributions today. I will share the recording with you, and we can promote that through our various social media enterprises. I know that Caitlin is in employment transition at the moment, but I hope that wherever you land, we will continue to be able to work together and collaborate in various forms. I'm grateful for all of you, and I appreciate your time on this, the second and last day of Dia de Muertos. And I hope that this is a chance also for us to remember those who have passed before us, depending on many circumstances, but in particular, I think it's worth honoring those who have transitioned from this life in the process of migration, and that is worthy of honor and respect, and action to change that reality. I give the last word to my colleagues if you would like to say anything before we sign off.
Yo les agradezco a todos, especialmente a ti, Richard, porque aprendo muchísimo con ustedes. Muchas gracias.
Well, that speaks for itself, but and Lupita, I'm grateful for you as well, because as you say, I also learn from you on a daily basis. So thank you. Cecilia, Anita, if you'd like to add anything, or Caitlin as well.
Same here. I appreciate each of you, and even though we talked about some challenges, I also feel that that I am also lucky to have a support system. The people who feel the same, who value the same things, and whom I can interact and work with and collaborate together. And all of you here and more people also at our college. I am just grateful. Yes, there are challenges, but getting to know these people and feeling the support, that makes it more meaningful. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Cecilia. Anita, yes.
And I also want to thank all of you. It has been a pleasure for me to work with Richard, Caitlin, and Cecile since I came to Canisius College. What I enjoyed the most, as Cecile said, was to find the people who share my same approach to life and teaching, and my same interest in the work and in the activity that we do. And I also want to thank Lupita. I really enjoy your presentation very, very much. You brought back a part of my childhood that I had almost forgot, which was my passion for literature, especially for Latin American literature, although I read it in Italian. And so muchas gracias. Muy enjoyable.
Thank you, Anita. And Lupita, I hope I did a modicum of justice to the translation. It's been a long day, so. Caitlin, I leave you the last word as the youngest member of our little group here.
I think as I'm hearing all of these closing remarks, I'm reflecting on the fact that I do think there's something unique about the collaboration that we've created together here at Canisius. Because I think that we come from the work that we do around borders and migrations, this mix of theory and teaching and praxis and immersion and service. All of these things do intersect. And as you've said, those relationships of collaboration, I think, make that possible. But I do want to, I think, acknowledge on that positive note of, I think there is something very unique about what's been created with this collaboration that is interdisciplinary. And we have other colleagues in other academic departments that have supported the Borders and Migrations Initiative or these efforts within their own context, even subjects or topics you might not traditionally associate with this. I'm thinking about the fact of how we collaborate across institutions. So we have Canisius represented, but Lupita in Mexico at Ibero, it's multiple institutions within that Ignatian family. And I think it crosses divisions at the college. So we have academic affairs, we have student affairs, and there's not a lot of spaces that I've seen, at least in our context of our college, where there's that sort of collaboration. We bring in the online learning center, the library, you know, so many areas come together on these initiatives to make it possible. And so I appreciate each of you sharing kind of those areas of expertise and focus and concentration, and just want to acknowledge that it is a joy to collaborate with you all, and also acknowledge that I think that is part of what makes this effort unique, and I hope has made this presentation thought-provoking for anybody that has attended or is watching, that for me at least, it's been that collaboration that has made this work unique and hopefully impactful for our students and our communities. So it's been a pleasure to be with you all, and thank you for your collaboration.
Well, thank you all. And as this is also an international and multilingual and interdisciplinary, I would like it if we each signed off with a statement of gratitude in our language of choice. For me, that would be Spanish. So gracias.
Teşekkürler.
Grazie.
Thank you.
Gracias.
Bueno, thank you.